We now turn to our second speaker for the proposition, Jasmin Glynn. Jasmin is an MPhil student reading education at Clare Hall College. They won the right to speak through open audition. Jasmin, the floor is yours.
What does it mean to be a sinner? When I talk about sin in this debate, I don't necessarily mean in the strictly religious sense. I define sin as the behaviors that deviate from mainstream social norms about the good way to live your life. We can see the idea of saint and sinner as those who live a good, proper life and those whose behavior deviates from the standards set by society. So, what does it mean to be a sinner? We've had a few ideas flying about what sin means, a lot of people, sticking to religion. But let's just think about, were this debate to have happened in this very room decades or centuries ago, what would we have taken as a given would be sinful behavior? Because I think some of the mainstream ideas, and some of these persist in the UK and abroad as well, of what behavior is sinful, is things like premarital sex, things like female sexuality, homosexuality, abortion, and so forth. Should we have aspired back then, if we were having that debate, to avoid this sinful behavior if these were the definitions of sin? Now, how might we imagine our conception of sin to change in the future? Who knows how ideas that we currently think are inherently morally bad are going to evolve over time? We can already see movements with things like drugs. We have increased legalization of drugs, more and more studies about the value of drugs in treating like depression and anxiety. We see things like sex work. Prostitution is often seen as like an inherent sin, but there's lots of movements to recognize sex work for what it is and give protection to sex workers. What point am I trying to make here? Look, the idea of sin is constantly changing. The goalposts of what is sinful behavior are always being moved by society. Side note here, it's not just society that's moving them, it's the people engaging in sinful behavior who are creating social movements which change what behavior is considered morally good in society. But look, more often than not, if we look back on history and what has historically been considered sinful, the sinners have arguably been on the right side of history. And if these people were to aspire to saintliness in their time, if they were to aspire to avoid this sin, well then they would have lived a life in shame and deprived themselves of their true wants, their identity, a good way to live their life. I'll take you in a second. Who's to say that those aspiring to saintliness today, those trying to not stray from these standards we set ourselves of what is a good way to live your life, aren't doing the same as people back in times where homosexuality was viewed as the ultimate sin, who deprived themselves of their identity, would be doing? Okay, who just went? Oh my God, sure. Might surprise you. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I will get onto the murder part of the argument soon. But I think, we should be able to live our lives by our own moral compasses. That's the kind of point that I'm going to be making, and I'll kind of flesh that out more. But yeah, exactly. I think the thing with these ideas of sin and saint is that it's someone else's doctrine that you're following. And I think that hopefully we're all kind of somewhat inherently good people, and we can do good things without being told by some church or social standards that we should be acting in a certain way. Okay, what is the rest of my speech going to look like? I'll give a little bit of rebuttal to what we've heard so far, and then I'm going to talk about the harms of aspiring to be a saint and why we should all embrace being a sinner. So, rebuttal. And if you follow my definition of sin, you can probably already think of a few issues that I have with what's been said so far. Because we've had a lot of stuff about you've got to acknowledge that you have sinned, but then you've got to beg for forgiveness. If the sin that you have done is just being gay, and then we're going out and saying, oh, go beg for forgiveness for that, no, don't fucking do that. Be gay. Do whatever the fuck you want. Have sex. I don't care. And I think there's just these ideas of oh, we're all broken, we're all sinners, but if we just aspire to acknowledge that and then we can be saints, I don't fucking care. Let's just honestly reject that. No, I'll take one later. We had this idea of like, oh, this, society thinks it's sexy to be sinful. Maybe that's a little bit problematic. I enjoyed hearing the different names that you read out. And what I've written here is that this is really just like a reaction against this very like hegemonic positioning of religion in Western society. We see that with a lot of like queer artists at the moment, Lil Nas X. They are actively leaning into this like sinful idea because these sins have been used to like historically oppress queer people and women. Was that everything else I was saying? Yeah, sure. Okay, the harms of aspiring to be a saint. So like I kind of said earlier, I think to aspire to be a saint is to live life by someone else's notion of what is right, what is a good way to live your life. And sin has been used as a tool of oppression. It's been used to regulate people's lives, of saying these are the things that you should avoid doing if you want to be a good person. And like I said, it's particularly impacted minorities when it's things like like who you can have sex with, when you can have sex, all of these things. And it's used this idea of shame as a tool of power, that you should feel ashamed of yourself if you engage in any behavior that is seen as deviant from the doctrine of how we should live our life. Sure.
So I'm guessing you'd say that oppressing people is sinful, right? I mean, that's a bad thing to do, but as in the proposition, you're saying that you'd rather be a sinner than a saint?
You're trying to trip me up, trying to hoist me by my own petard. No, I just think people should live their lives how they want to live them. And, there's a lot of bad people out there. I'll get onto this. The point that I'm going to make, I had too much wine before this, is that the point I'm going to make is that bad things happen on both sides of the house, right? If people are aspiring to be saints, they're going to end up doing bad things anyway. The difference is, if you're constantly trying to avoid this idea of sin, then you're constantly ashamed of yourself. And I think on our side, we get a world which is more free, where people don't have to feel ashamed of what they're doing. That kind of response to it. And yeah, this idea of sin also ignores context. If we say something like stealing is inherently a sin, but you're stealing a loaf of bread because you can't afford to feed your family, like in Les Miserables, it ignores any context. We shouldn't have such a black and white world. We should be able to sort of regulate morality how we see fit and think of ourselves and what we're doing as moral actors and decide for ourselves without thinking of the teachings of some society or church or whatever it is. No, I'm going to stop taking those because you're throwing me off. Okay. And my point, so the harms of aspiring to be a saint. And I say that aspiring to saintliness causes harm at two levels, an individual level and a societal level. At an individual level, if you're constantly aspiring to avoid these sins that you've been told doing this is sinful, even if you really want to, you shouldn't, like masturbation or whatever, you're going to like self-loathe, right? You're going to hate yourself, and this tool of shame is working on you. And that's if you engage in it. The alternative is if you'll just be depriving yourself of things that may make you happy, may make life worth living. And like I said, we don't know how the concept of what behavior is considered sinful is going to evolve. So why should we feel shamed for something that maybe in the future people aren't going to see as a sin? And then at a societal level, this culture of shame and taboo, this idea that, we want to be seen as a good society, we want to be seen as something, as a society where everyone is acting in a saintly way, all that does is causes harm by pushing things underground. If we think about something like the porn industry, one of the reasons it's so fucked up is that this sex has been very taboo for a very long time. And when these industries developed, they were developing often outside of like the realms of like government, and there were no protections in place for the people who really need to be protected by in these industries. These are very like violent, oppressive, and things like that, or like the drug trade as well. And that's because of society aspiring to be like this sort of saintly ideal of like we're living a perfect life and all of that. Okay, finally, why we should all embrace being a sinner. The alternative to trying to avoid these things that have been dictated to you as sinful. It's just living life by your own moral compass. Dip into sin whenever you want. Prioritize what you want to do, pleasure, whatever. Reject the very concept of sin and live life how you want to. Be a sinner in this paradigm that we have, and I kind of agree with the girl over there that, yeah, we should maybe not dichotomize it like this, but I'm in a debate speaking this, so this is what I'm doing. What about things like murder? Surely people need some moral guidance. Aren't you just encouraging us all to be bad people? Some of you may be crying out in your not little minds. We're all at Cambridge. Look, bad things are going to happen on either side of the debate, like I said. I think it's better for people who are engaging in things that may be outdated notions of sin to not feel ashamed for being who they are. I think on aggregate, we gain more by embracing sin, by feeling happy about the way we're living our lives, by not feeling this shame. We have a much more positive society when everyone feels that way. And this guy over there was saying about oh, you don't want your friends to be sinners. Pretty fun people can be sinners, fun people. No, please conclude. There we go. Look, my job today is to convince you that the world is a better place when we all reject the idea of aspiring to be a saint and we embrace sin. I hope I've done that. I think I've shown that aspiring to be a saint causes harm at a societal and an individual level, and it's a little bit fun to embrace sin. So to live in a world where people can look back upon their lives without shame and self-hatred for being their authentic selves, vote proposition. Come on, indulge yourselves a little.